yourself and the negotiation team. So thank you very much. Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Mitchell. I'm the PSA National Organiser for ACC. I'm also the PSA advocate for our bargaining team, and I'm based in Christchurch. It's Josh.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Josh Gardner, based in Nelson. I'm a PSA organiser. I was also part of the REM working group and on the bargaining team.
Kia ora, I'm Susan Young. I'm the ACC National Delegates Convener. I am on the bargaining team, also the Māori Enterprise Delegate, and was also part of the REM working group. Kia ora.
Good morning, I'm Shannon Gibbs. I am the National Delegate for the Southern South Island and a member of the bargaining team.
Thank you very much for that. And there's an apology from Selwyn, who was here, but he wasn't feeling too good, so he's apologised for this meeting. Stephanie, if you could outline, please, what the purpose of this meeting is and what you hope to achieve.
Okay, so we've been in negotiations since September last year for the renewal of the current collective agreement, and we have reached the point after a number of ups and downs in bargaining where the bargaining team feels that it's time to come back to the members and ask them for some direction as to where we go next. And you'll understand that a bit more after I've gone through what's been taking place.
Okay. Please, a reminder, if you've got any questions or any comments to make, lodge them in the chat room there. Stephanie, if you could give us a background, please, as to the negotiations and where we're up to.
Okay, so we started negotiations in September, and I just want to set a bit of background to these particular negotiations. For those of you who've been with us for a couple of years or even a number of years, you'll know that the current remuneration system came in around 2013. It was purported by ACC to have many bells and whistles and to deliver many things for members. And members have found since the implementation of the current system that it doesn't deliver. It doesn't deliver what ACC said it would deliver, and it doesn't deliver in general for members. It's not transparent. It's very ambiguous in how it's applied. Members don't really understand this very complex system and how it's implemented, how the funding works, and even how you're going to get a pay rise and what that pay rise might look like. So really, since the instigation of the system, we have been trying to negotiate it out again. It came in because there was an offer on the table, actually from the board back then, that in exchange for changing hours of work and some other factors within the collective agreement, including around the access to sick leave, that there would be this new pay system. It would be more accessible. People would move more quickly through the system, and you'd get a better outcome for your remuneration. And there was also an element around superannuation there. So it did have some very attractive elements for a number of members, and there were some members for genuine reasons decided not to be part of it. As I said, it hasn't worked for members, and when we came out to you for the bargaining in 2017, it was very clear from members that it was time to draw the line, to say enough is enough, the system has to go. ACC haven't made it work the way they said that it would work, and it was time for a better system that worked for members and for ACC. Because it has to be said that this type of system that ACC is running is very expensive for the organisation. It's expensive in the external consultancy type information that they have to acquire, the market data they have to buy from an international organisation. The amount of time it takes to administer the system is very time intensive, and it's expensive. And for our members, it's not workable. So the direction from members for the 2017 bargaining was that it has to go. So we went into bargaining. We were very clear with ACC that along with several other claims, the primary claim was renegotiation of the remuneration system. We did spend the first couple of sessions at that time talking about what a remuneration system should look like. There seemed to be some interest, but at the same time, the constant caveat that actually they thought their system worked. And also an acknowledgement that by both groups, by both parties, that to change a remuneration system is very complex and you've got to get it right. And it takes some investment. So it was agreed that actually the best thing would be to take that outside of bargaining and to approach it through a REM working group. That was the proposal put at the time that the collective was being ratified. Excuse me. And we know from member feedback at that time that it is what convince members that actually they should vote in favour of that particular collective agreement. And to be honest, there wasn't much else on the table at that time. So we moved into, the document was ratified, we moved into the REM working group. We worked very well together as a group. We had senior management there from ACC, talent representatives, senior management. It started out slowly as both parties felt their way through and understanding the perspectives of each other and the needs of both parties. But by the end of it, we had actually a common understanding of what the REM structure needed to look like, and some key principles about what needs to underpin a remuneration working group. So when that working group concluded around March of last year, we were also holding meetings with members about what are the key things for bargaining this time round. And again, the remuneration and performance management systems were top of the list. We collected from all the members' meetings the issues that were of importance to members, and then the national delegates worked on putting those together into a cohesive presentation for members to vote on, prioritising their top 5. And the top issue that came through in those top 5 was the remuneration system. We started bargaining, as I said, in September, and right away it was very clear from ACC's stance was that they were not going to give any consideration to the work that had gone before in the remuneration working group. And we were really starting from the beginning again. A number of people in their bargaining team had been involved in the previous negotiations. They had been involved in the remuneration working group. And it was really disheartening to find that information and that knowledge wasn't transferred now into this bargaining team, and that they weren't giving any credence to that earlier work. We started out at, in the first days of bargaining, they recognised and acknowledged that this was our key issue for bargaining. We made it clear that while we had a number of claims on the table, that actually we didn't want to distract our attention by, dealing with those. We wanted to focus on remuneration that had to be dealt with before we could deal with anything else, including the number of claims that ACC had. And I have to say ACC's claims weren't large, but we really wanted to focus on this REM system. So right from the beginning, they asked for an adjournment to go back and talk with the necessary people at ACC, with our focus being to facilitate being able to progress this dialogue and to be able to resolve, the negotiation of a new system. We agreed to that. It then took them 5 weeks to agree to a new set of dates and to reconvene. Again, we came together again, and again we had a shortened period of time. So the time that we had booked for the bargaining was shortened by ACC again, wishing to adjourn and go away and do some further work. That's not uncommon in a bargaining scene, but for our delegates within the bargaining team, that was doubly frustrating. One, we weren't being able to optimise the time that we had set aside, but it also meant that they were stuck in Wellington. Their flights weren't able to be rebooked. They weren't able to go home like everybody else was, including the managers. So disappointing for a number of reasons. I acknowledge that at that session, we did some good discussions with ACC about the REM system, but again, we were hampered by how far that they felt they could take those discussions. We then had another meeting in February, a similar sort of process, good discussions, early finish, and to reconvene sometime in March. We were aware that there was this COVID cloud coming in, and in March, I was contacted by the ACC bargaining advocate, who's Kane McLeod, and he asked if we could have a short lineup meeting. Now, a short lineup meeting is where usually just the advocates and some representatives from each organisation meet together to problem solve and brainstorm some ideas to try and kind of break any impasse or to progress some ideas that are occurring in bargaining. So it was Kane McLeod and Catherine Kadaya, who is the ER manager and talent, and myself and the PSA organisers involved in this negotiation, who met in Christchurch for 2 days in March. And again, we did further work on what the remuneration structures needed to look like. We were feeling positive about having had this engagement, but the ACC organisers felt that there were some limitations to how far we had got in March, and we felt very strongly that this work that we had done needed to be taken back to your representatives, your delegates on the bargaining team, to see what they thought about it, because the organisers felt it could go either way as to how the members would feel about whether or not we had gone far enough in this first step of developing a remuneration system. We then went into the COVID lockdown, and during that time frame, I was trying to get ACC back to the bargaining table, to reconvene the bargaining teams, to talk about the work that we had done in March. And there seemed to be some real reticence to doing that. I'm not sure what their reserves were about coming back together virtually. Coming out of lockdown, and so your bargaining team have not actually seen that work that was undertaken in March. Coming out of lockdown, we had a number of phone calls between myself and the PSA Assistant Secretary and Catherine and Kane about the direction that bargaining was going, what outcome were we looking for, and we were again very clear that this REM system work needed to be undertaken. We got to July and feeling really quite frustrated that we weren't getting back to the table. PSA felt quite strongly that we needed to have 2 days face-to-face back at the table. Let's push this through. Let's come to some understanding one way or the other. Where are we at with developing the remuneration system? Again, some reluctance on the part of ACC. They've moved into this austerity setting, and so reluctance to put any funding into travel or into meetings. There was an indication of wanting to meet virtually. We felt that virtually wasn't going to be helpful, particularly with our team so dispersed around the country. It's not a supportive environment for negotiating, so we really felt that a face-to-face was important, and we did convey that to ACC. Towards the end of July, I asked for a written response to our claims to bargaining, which I will go through with you shortly. But just at this point, I'd like to ask if the delegates and the organiser who are involved in bargaining would like to talk about their experience and how they saw the process.
So just to reiterate, I suppose going back to the remuneration working group, we actually thought that we'd reached, in essence, some tacit agreement that was going to be going back to the board for checking, and then leading into bargaining with that piece of work that we'd done. So the frustration that sat alongside the advocates and the REM working group management team that had taken that back to the board, or lack of taking it back to the board and progressing the matters, was extreme. And that certainly led to the significant delays at the start, like Stephanie said, rehashing absolutely everything. And then involving the Assistant Secretary in the conversations with the advocate and the bargaining team, giving clear direction around what our expectations are for him to be able to sign off on a proposed terms of settlement. So, Stephanie said that there was frustration, but it was more than that. And I just want to acknowledge the work of the delegates and Stephanie in those frustrating times. So, yeah. Thanks.
Susan here. Just reiterating what Stephanie and Josh have both said. It's been a frustrating journey. We started out a few years ago getting them to identify the errors in the pay system and the PDC system. We even had managers that they had brought as representatives to show us the pay system and the matrix actually say to us at the time that, they're glad that we're looking into this because they don't like the system itself. So when it was decided after the first round of bargaining that the best way forward would be the REM working group to help establish what a new pay system may look like, because there wasn't enough time in that bargaining round to be able to hash out a system quickly. So that was understandable. That's what the members agreed to, that REM working group going forward. And then when we hit this round of bargaining, it was like it had never happened. And again, ACC were reiterating that they felt pay performance was the way to go. And again, it was a bit of a struggle for us to be able to get them to understand the work that we'd done prior, and the fact that this is the main claim on the table and this is not going to go away. And since then, like Stephanie said, we've been told to come up for meetings. We've arrived, and before the morning's even over, they've said we need to go back and discuss it with others. And that's left us stranded for a week in Wellington, unable to go home to our families, because they've been, I feel they've been unprepared when they've come to us. And so we're at this stage where we as the bargaining team don't feel that there's any movement, and now it's up to the members on what they decide and how we progress with this forward. So kia ora.
Thanks, Susan. I wasn't involved in the remuneration working group, although I was fairly well briefed as a national delegate as to what was going on there. The work had sounded really encouraging. Information was brought in about other systems used by other areas of the public service to show what kind of good firm remuneration systems that aren't linked to performance and don't take incredible amounts of time and energy to do really looked like. And I feel like the membership extended good faith to ACC by agreeing to another 1-year term of a collective employment agreement so that work could be done. So echoing what others have said, it was then very disappointing to begin bargaining to find ACC seemed unprepared to negotiate, and even somewhat surprised that we wished to negotiate on the issue of pay, even though it has been, of course, our members' main concern for many rounds of bargaining now. There was some progress made, as Stephanie covered, over time, but that progress has, for whatever reason, ceased to exist now, and we seem to be not able to make any further progress towards any sort of agreement as to what a different pay framework might look like for our members. So that's why we're approaching you guys, to let you know what's been happening and to get your input as to what you would like to happen next. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. So I'll just run through now ACC's response to our principal claims. If you haven't had a look at them recently, you can find them on the PSA website. If you go to the members section, there is an ACC page where we've been uploading the newsletters we send you, and also you can find the claims document there. One of the things that we have found over time with bargaining is that if you go into bargaining and put a proposal to an employer, for example, like this first claim here, that we need recognition of Treaty of Waitangi, in the document, they will say, well, you know, you put together some words and come back to us. So this time we were fully prepared. We put together some draft clauses. And that is not to say that we were wedded 100% to the wording in those draft clauses. What they're intended to do is to convey the direction that we think that those clauses should focus on and the importance of them in the collective agreement. The reason for wanting the recognition of the treaty and the collective agreement is firstly because there is a treaty relationship within New Zealand. The government is a party to it, and ACC as a government organisation, a government-owned organisation, should also be a party to it. ACC, and we've had quite some discussion about this as national delegates over the last few years with ACC about Te Whai Te Tika strategy, and the fact that it doesn't recognise staff. It doesn't encompass staff in that strategy. There is a very short reference to staff, but actually it is entirely externally focused. And we think that there needs to be a focus on staff and the commitment and the expectations of the treaty, which apply to all New Zealanders. They're about good behaviours, good practice, about wholeness and, you know, collectivity, which is really what, you know, you as union members are about. So that was our reasoning behind wanting it recognised in the collective agreement. So ACC's response is that they are committed to the Treaty of Waitangi and its own Whai Te Tika strategy, and it's prepared to look at appropriate wording to reference these commitments. Unfortunately, you know, having provided them with quite a bit of wording as an example of what, you know, could be encompassed in that clause, they haven't done any reflection on that and they haven't responded to it. So we really question whether providing more wording would be helpful. There's no indication as to what they see as appropriate wording. There's really no positive proactive engagement in that response. If we go over to the next significant claim, it's the fair pay and secure workplaces, which is the remuneration and performance system. And their response is that they believe good progress has been made by the parties in relation to performance and remuneration. However, ACC, along with other public sector agencies and Crown entities, is now required to work within substantially different bargaining parameters. This changed mandate, along with the current economic uncertainty, means that we're not in a position to commit to any form of future guaranteed increases at this time. ACC is hopeful the progress already made will not be lost and could form the starting place for future negotiations. Now, nobody denies that there has been a financial situation. You know, you as members haven't been involved through our submission back to your chief executive about the decision this year to not make any pay increases. And we felt that it fell short of what the State Services Commission recommendations provided for in making pay increases and bargaining at this time. And ACC chose to actually hold back from any of those State Services Commission recommendations. It's interesting to note that ACC, sitting within the state sector, as it has been, has chosen when it wants to be part of a state services commission direction and when it doesn't. And it seems to pick and choose when that suits it. We also want to point out that other than those pay framings that put out by the SSC, there hasn't been changes to the bargaining parameters. There has been nothing that precludes them from working on the remuneration and performance systems with us. And they have chosen to put a financial ring fence around this discussion. Excuse me. The next item, if I don't lose my voice, is the career development. And we feel it's important, sorry, that any performance framework includes career development.
How about we just have a wee pause here, just for Stephanie to get her voice back?
Sorry, it's very dry in here. I'll just get something on bed.
It's Susan here. Apologies, everybody. This is actually our 5th meeting for members. So as you can imagine, Stephanie's had to talk a fair bit. So do bear with us.
This is where we play some nice elevator music in the background, just to fill the gap. Yeah.
So I thought I'd take the I thought I'd just take the quick opportunity to talk about the remuneration system just a little bit more, because for some of you, you might be hearing words like decoupling and delinking performance and pay. And what that's about is putting in a system which removes that discretion of the employer. So we have, some automatic progression through a scale, which limits the ability of the organisation to have that discretionary outcome that you've had in the past. I see Stephanie's back, so that was a real short part from me, but welcome back.
Doing very well there, Josh. Sorry about that. Air conditioning and asthma are not good bedmates. So the redundancy compensation, this was a key issue for members as well. We did some research and we found that the cap on the redundancy hadn't been lifted since 1998. And in 1998, the cap on the redundancy was equivalent to the top salary under coverage, and it now sits below the middle of the range of salaries for coverage. So we felt that it really needed some addressing. We also felt that coverage needs to be addressed. We think that any PSA member is entitled to be under coverage of a collective agreement. You've got far less power to negotiate on an individual collective agreement and to influence what your terms and conditions are going to be. The current clause has 2 components to it. One is that those under coverage don't have any direct reports to them, and the other is that you have to be on band 16 or lower. Now, the band 16 is quite historic, and it hasn't been adjusted for some time. When it was first put in place, it was quite a high band in the range, and now it's not. We have a number of members who don't have direct reports, who are over a band 16, and they should come within the coverage. But ACC are putting their reliance on the band 16 as being the limit. So we feel that there are inequities there that need to be addressed. We had a number of technical tidy-ups to be dealt with, and they're not difficult. Another key issue for members was the sick leave, domestic leave, bereavement leave, and there's another one in there, excuse me. It's not quite coming to mind at the moment. And flexi time. And we felt that these need to be brought together into one more holistic approach to how this leave is able to be accessed and we called it, for the purposes of negotiation, the wellbeing or whānau leave. And this is really because historically these clauses come from a very European nuclear family approach. And that's not how New Zealand society works. And, you know, there's no two people at this meeting who have exactly the same family setup, family needs and responsibilities. And so we wanted to be able to make these leave provisions more accessible for staff and actually allow ACC to be more supportive of their staff to be at work, but also to address their family social responsibilities. ACC weren't terribly keen on that idea, and their response was that it has a cost factor that, you know, needs to be taken into account when looking at the remuneration system. But unfortunately, we're not even looking at the remuneration system at the moment. The other one that is very topical at the moment is flexible working. And so you'll all be aware that ACC is doing a lot of work around what they call flexible working. I call it remote working because there's not a lot of flexibility in it. It's still within the constraints of ACC's way of organising work and their timeframes and their expectations. And it doesn't provide a lot of flexibility for people and their social commitments. ACC's response to this claim is they're happy to work with us on the wording of the current clause. Well, we know that the current clause doesn't work. It doesn't deliver anything for members. It is a very tight clause. It provides very limited opportunity to have flexible working. And so we wanted to focus on a more holistic approach. Subsequent to making the claim, of course, we've had the State Services Commission guidelines to flexible working come out, and their focus is flexible working by default. And what that means is that you don't get it automatically, but it turns on its head this business imperative that has driven flexible working in the public service and in ACC. And so what it says is you should be looking at enabling flexible working for your staff on a case-by-case basis. Flexible working is one, business needs is one component that you need to consider, but it's not the primary driver of what determines whether or not somebody can access flexible working. We don't believe that the direction that ACC are going at the moment with their flexible working structure actually addresses that change in focus on looking at the primary needs of the individual rather than the needs of the business. So those are the claims that we had on the table. There are one or two other small ones, and you can see those if you go on the website. So what next? As your delegates have said, and I've referred to it just a bit earlier, we kind of come to a bit of an impasse. We're not moving anywhere at the moment, and we want to know what you think about this. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to collate the comments and the questions and the responses in the chat lines from all of these meetings, and then we'll send them out to you in a themed sort of way so that you can get some sense of them. And then in the next 2 weeks, we're going to survey you, and we're going to ask you one of 3 questions. Now, these questions aren't exclusive to each other, and it's not a right or a wrong. Primarily, they're to help your bargaining team understand how you're feeling about where bargaining has got to and where it's likely to go. So the first choice is, do you ask your bargaining team simply to try harder to get the ACC team back to the table? The second is, do we formally seek mediation with ACC about bargaining? And when we undertake mediation, it's done with the assistance of mediators from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, who are very skilled in this area of assisting bargaining teams move through what might seem like a real barrier or deadlock. They're also very good at highlighting where a particular party might be a bit stuck in their own thinking and can be quite helpful in that area. and also the expectations of legislation and government direction in this situation. And it is very clear that the Employment Relations Act does expect that collective agreements will include methods of progressing through pay, of identified pay for the job, and that pay will be negotiated. So, and the third option is, do the members think we should take a formal vote on industrial action? And industrial action can take a number of directions, and it can be done in a very low-key way, or in the, the traditional out on the street with the placards. And it's always driven by the membership and what they think is the most effective way of undertaking that action. Its intention is to disrupt the business of the employer, but also to draw public attention to the situation. So what I'm also going to do now is to ask Josh and the national delegates if there's anything coming through on the chat that they'd like me to respond to.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. We do have one question earlier from Joanne. She's asking if ACC is using COVID situation as a stalling tactic.
I'm not sure that's so much a stalling tactic as actually wanting to wind up bargaining. They've intimated to us that they would rather have a rollover of the current collective, which would mean pretty much no changes, and that they would have another year for us to work with them on the remuneration system. And the bargaining team feel that actually we've invested quite a long time in trying to work with them on the remuneration system, and not feeling like it's going to achieve anything much more, even if we have more time.
Thank you. Just if anybody does have questions, please use your chat function. If you don't have chat available, do raise your hand.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. Has there been any issues that have been raised in other meetings which you'd like to comment about?
Yeah, so one of the ones that's very topical, of course, is the hours of work situation, particularly for those under the next gen case management regime. If you had an hours of work structure prior to going into restructuring, and your manager now wants you to take on a different structure of hours of work, you don't have to. You have your set hours of work, and those can only be changed by negotiation or by a change management consultation process. Now, we feel quite strongly that through a comprehensive change management process that ACC have gone through, they had full opportunity to say, we want to look at more structured hours of work, we want to do rostering, this is what it would look like, this is the impact it would have on staff. But they didn't do that. They made a very small reference in the documentation to some roles possibly being rostered, and they talked all the way through the process about terms and conditions of staff not being impacted. So if you're in that situation, if you feel that you're under some pressure to change your established hours of work for a new set of hours of work that don't fit your needs, then do talk to your delegates, do talk to your local organiser, because we will help you work through that situation. The other one is the flexi time. Sorry, go ahead, Susan.
Yep, sorry, we've got a few questions that have popped through. One from Solomon, who said, unfortunately, any pay hike negotiations or any other action will be seen in the wider COVID context. And I can very much see a newspaper headline saying PSA presses for pay hike when thousands across the country have lost their jobs. So it could be a PR disaster.
Okay, so we've been really clear with ACC that this is not about a pay hike. This is about establishing a system that manages how people progress through their pay bands and is very transparent about what their pay is wherever they are on the band and how they can progress and what the impact is of any performance system on the individual. So you don't have a work regime without some sort of performance structure. Okay, but in ACC, it's a very it's a system that is not clear, it's not transparent, and it does have a real distortion on your pay. Whereas actually we think that a performance system should be about developing the individual. There's a minority of people who don't perform for whatever reason at any given time. And there's a way of managing and supporting and coaching those people. And the rest of the people just get on and do their job. And that system should support them and enable them to get on and do their job. And the current system doesn't do that. So this is not an argument about pay. It's not an argument about more money. It's just about an argument really about the structure and the systems that are in place.
Thanks, Stephanie. We do have a question that's sort of outside of the bargaining.
Sorry.
Yep, but Linda has asked, what could happen currently if we get work outside of our pay level?
Okay, so that's a good question, and it's come up in other meetings. I'm assuming from the question that you're in one of those roles that has 2 levels of pay. We have been working in the background quite a bit with ACC on this. Well, I shouldn't say working with, but more trying to engage and have a real dialogue about this. The response has been that the work allocation system is not sophisticated enough to determine when work is of more complexity and should go to the higher pay band. And so it's not able to distinguish between those in the lower pay band and those in the higher pay band and who should get which bits of work. So the advice we've received is that those members in the lower range of pay should send that work back if it belongs to the higher range of pay. And we know that that's not practical and it's not going to happen. When we went through the consultation process, we were very clear with ACC that we had some real concerns about these roles that had 2 levels of pay. The initial proposal from ACC was that everybody was just in there mixed up together. There was no real clear delineation about when you were in one level and then when you moved to the other level, who did what and how you determined that. We did manage to get them to agree that there was one group here, one group there, and the higher group was responsible for more complex work, and they were responsible for coaching those in the lower band. They haven't been able to do that, one, because their competency system is not up and running. Now, during the consultation process, again, we offered to be part of that development to assist that with that so that it was a transparent and achievable system. They didn't take us up on that offer. We have made that offer again subsequently to help get that work underway. And that informs really, one, what is the level of competence that this person is working at? That's not necessarily what they are capable of, but what they're being paid at, and therefore what level of work they should be assigned at. And also, if they're going to have this system and they're going to pay people at different levels, then they need to get a system that's smarter at determining which bits of work go where. This whole, both those aspects impact on the whole of the next generation case management structure. And we are frustrated along with you that those pieces of work don't seem to be moving as fast as they should, while staff are struggling to deal with the work that's coming through. And we're very aware of the amount of work that you guys are having to deal with. And that, you know, the earlier question around the media disaster, we have very skilled media people in the PSA, and they can frame the dialogue if we have to go out to the media around, you guys were up and running almost from the beginning when you went into COVID lockdown. You have been there supporting your clients and been available. Pardon me. The amount of work that you're undertaking, huge workloads. We know that a number of your third-party providers are not happy with their inability to engage successfully with ACC, and that's not a reflection on the staff, that's a reflection on the system that's been implemented. So there are ways of framing this that attract the support and the attention of the wider public.
Thank you, Stephanie. We've got another question here from Chrissy. How long does mediation take? Would it be like a full another round of bargaining?
It is like bargaining because you've got the two parties at the table, but what you've got someone doing is actually facilitating the conversation. And there is no way of defining how long it takes. It really takes as long as, the parties are willing to keep talking and moving forward. So again, it could be a half a day because one party says, well, we've talked this all through and we don't see any benefit in talking about it anymore. Or it could take a couple of weeks as you actually work through all the nuts and bolts of what actually has to, be in place to have a proper REM system.
Lovely, thanks, Stephanie. We've got another one from Joanne. It's not really a question, but a statement. She said, currently we are being sent emails from Mike and Scott telling us to lift our performance. They are aware that we're still going through NGCM changes and that Tranche 5 is currently rolling out. Feels as though they are adding to current stress levels associated with rollout and with the pay, etc.
I'd be really interested in seeing those emails because they don't sound appropriate to me, given the current situation that the country's in, given, what staff have committed to do and are undertaking at the moment. That's not supportive at all, in my view.
Yeah, we can arrange for those to come out to you, Stephanie. We've got another question from Amanda. Can you clarify what's likely to happen for those of us on the grandfathered non-R3 contracts?
Okay, so our intention in developing a new system is that everybody who's under coverage would come in within the scope of the new system. And I know when we started the talks with ACC, certainly in the REM working group, their intention is that the system would apply across ACC. And that makes sense. Employers find it difficult and expensive to run multiple pay systems. And also it leads to errors and stuff like that. That has a cost factor. There has to be some way of recognizing and acknowledging the differences that people have in their pay and their terms and conditions in order to bring them into a new structure. Also, bringing people who are currently on the R3 into a new structure may have and is likely to have some cost implications. If you're looking at the banded system that we're talking about, which has progressive steps, then you have to identify what those steps are, and you have to identify where people are currently, and then slot them over to those steps. Sometimes you bring them over on the salary they're on, and over a period of time you bring them up to the step amount, and sometimes you bring them over and lift them up. It really depends on what's negotiated, but there is a cost element. And so our intention is actually to work through all the different permutations of where people are at and what needs to happen to bring them into a new pay system. So we're fully mindful of those folk on the legacy system and what that means for them in transitioning to any new system.
Lovely, thank you, Stephanie. We've got another question. It's not really bargaining, but quite relevant for what's happening at the moment. So from Elia, can we please get a bit more info around how we negotiate our hours if the hours on offer does not fit around home or life, and what the next steps are if we've had the discussion with our leader, given a bit of background, suggested a reasonable alternative roster, yet the request was declined. Please and thank you.
Okay, so we've put out a number of newsletters and delegates have probably got access to those. I suggest you talk to your site delegates and your local organiser if you need to about that information and whether or not you're eligible to kind of have that debate with your manager. It will depend on whether or not you had those structured hours before going into the change management process, before that was implemented, what those look like and what's being proposed now. But I do encourage you to, get that support if you're in that situation. Newer people into the organisation will have come in on more structured hours. And if you're wanting to change those, then that's a different kind of conversation altogether.
Thanks, Stephanie. That's all the questions through the chat so far.
Great, thank you. So I might hand back to Richard.
Okay. Now, just a reminder about what's going to happen from now on through. All of the chat stuff from all of the meetings will be collated and distributed out so that people can see what has been going on. Just checking that last comment that came in.
Yeah, there's one from Vena just saying that they're getting only complex claims with high caseloads and having to support new staff members, answering phone calls and do first call resolution on the calls from hunt groups, and it's creating a lot of stress on the current staff.
And a comment there from Solomon.
Managers seem to have their own understanding of PDCs. While some colleagues are allowed career-enhancing non-current role-related courses, others are restricted to current roles only, with the negotiations cover PDCs as well.
Okay, just quick responses in relation to the workload stuff. Have a discussion with your site delegate and in the first instance, and you might need to talk to your local organiser who, if they need to, will take advice from me. We certainly want to be engaging with ACC on these situations, and the more information we have, the more useful it is and the more we can push through on these for you. Sorry, the second question was around,
was around PDCs.
Yes.
And of course, they've said that managers have their own understanding of PDCs, which is something that we've come across a lot. They want to know, will the negotiations cover PDCs as well?
Definitely, that's part of what we want to address, this whole system of pay and performance. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, let's leave it there then. Please look out in the next couple of weeks for the survey, which is going to be sent out seeking direction or comment to the negotiation team about how to progress the negotiations. And that will be very helpful for that team to give them that information. At this point in time, I'd like to really thank the negotiation team for their patience, time and energy that they've put into the process so far. It is difficult and it will continue to be difficult, and we thank you very much for your efforts in that regard. Thanks, Stephanie, for lasting the through and her voice lasting the distance. So I hope everyone has a lovely day, and let's keep in touch and keep contacting. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Lovely.
Bye.
We did have one further question that came in a little bit late.
Do you want to send it to me, Susan?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Susan, do you want to just finish off with a karakia to close the session, please?
Sure, not a problem. Just a minute, because my memory is not fantastic. Kia tātou rangamārie, kia runga e ngā iwi o te ao, amini.
Amini.
Kia ora. Goodbye,
Thank you, everybody.
Kia ora, everyone. Thanks for attending.
Just for those who joined at the very end of the meeting and therefore missed most of it, there is another one at 2 o'clock. If you would like the appointment for that, email me, Shannon Gibbs, and I will forward it to you. Cheers.